Everyone, I'm Tony Taguba, the chairman of the Pan Pacific American Leaders and Mentors, or PPAM. And we want to welcome you to our fourth virtual leadership seminar since we started this last year. And this month we are celebrating the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month as well. And on the eve of Memorial Day commemoration, which is at the end of the month. And today's seminar is on leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion, an important but somewhat controversial program, though we're still on board with it. Before I introduce our distinguished guest speaker, let me acknowledge our senior leaders, General Eric Shinzeki, United States Army, retired, former Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and also former Chief of Staff of the Army. We had Ms. Belle-Liang Hong, I think she's going to chime in here, President and CEO of Knowledge Advantage, Inc., and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. We have Major General Eldon Regua, all the way from California. And I passed Lieutenant General Mike Rochelle, United States Army, former Army G1, and is also president of MDR Strategies Consulting Firm. And there's many more that's on board, so I'll just acknowledge them as well. And I think we have several students also chiming in. A bit of history about diversity and inclusion, now diversity, equity, and inclusion, that in organizations and the workplace environment have always been challenged with diversity and inclusion since equal opportunity and affirmative actions came into being. But diversity education started in the 1960s, much to my chagrin, to increase awareness on cultural understanding and belonging as a concept to enhance innovation and increase productivity as the workplace, even today and before, had become more diverse. It was expanded. This education was expanded in the 70s and 80s as a solution to the civil rights movement and violent demonstrations regarding treatment of citizens of color in our country. And further on March 15, 2011, the congressionally mandated Military Leadership Diversity Commission presented their findings and 20 recommendations on policies and best practices to shape diversity among military leaders and, of course, institutional organizations. And further, on August 18, 2011, President Obama signed Executive Order 13583 that established a coordinated government-wide initiative to promote diversity and inclusion in the workforce. And recently, on June 18, 2020, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Mark Esper, issued his directive to form the Defense Board on Diversity and Inclusion in the Military and to establish a Defense Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion and throughout the armed forces. And currently, the word equity was included in the D&I term and now called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And diversity and inclusion with equity has always been, will be, and will always be a work in progress when it comes to cultural awareness, respect, and tolerance to racial equality, with more leaders and champions to ensure we have an accountable set of accountable programs that really matters and are measurable. To give us a perspective on this important topic, we are delighted to have Lieutenant General Mike Rochelle to present his thoughts and a bit of his background. He retired from the United States Army after serving as the Army G1. He has over 40 years of expertise in leadership development in the military and civilian workforce, expertise in human resources and human capital programs, and also in organizational performance and building resilient leadership teams are well renowned. He is a sought-after featured speaker on leadership development. He is a coaching fellow at George Mason University Center of Wellbeing, and a former member of the board of directors of the globally acclaimed Center of Creative Leadership. He is a professional certified coach at the executive level. He is credentialed by the International Coaching Federation and as a member of the Forbes Coaches Council Institute of Coaching, an affiliate of the Harvard University Medical School. Now, PPAM is proud to have him as an honorary board member of the Pan Pacific American Leaders and Mentors. Please welcome Lieutenant General retired Mike Rochelle.
Tony, thank you so very Tony, thank you so very much for that very generous and kind introduction. Let me also acknowledge General Shinseki, Secretary Shinseki, someone I have forever held in the very highest esteem, and in my humble opinion, one of the Army's absolutely unmatched leaders in any category you want to speak about it in. Sir, it's a real delight to see you again. I'd like to also acknowledge Bell. I haven't seen Bell in, my gosh, maybe 12 years. No, maybe not quite that long. Let's say 10, perhaps 10. And Eldon, it's great to see you, my friend. It's been a long time. First of all, I want to acknowledge and commemorate and celebrate Asian American Pacific Islanders recognition and appreciation this month. Nothing could be more important than doing that. And I hope our nation lives up to your expectations and mine as well. In this area and during this special recognition time. What a rich history, what a significant contribution to our nation's progress and well-being. I'd like to start by telling you where I've been for the last 72 hours. Not so much where I've been, because I've been right here in my home office in front of this computer, but I've been presenting from 8 in the morning until 5 p.m. in the evening, last Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, yesterday, to 25 aspiring coaches who are seeking to learn what this special talent called leadership and executive coaching is in the context and by the definition of the International Coach Federation. So it's a remarkable program hosted and housed, as Tony indicated, under the Center for the Advancement of Well-Being at George Mason University. Thanks to that university where I received my training almost 9 years ago as a coach, I'm now privileged to be a part of that coach training faculty. And what a joy it is, because it allows leaders and people to see what leaders can aspire to when they are willing to ask difficult questions. When they're willing to ask difficult questions. And our nation has many difficult questions that it must ask around the area or the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Frankly, our world does. Literally, what's going on right now in Israel points to the truth of that fact, that it's not just our challenge, it's a human challenge. And it spans every aspect of our society. Tony mentioned that I had the privilege for 6 years of serving on the board of governors for the phenomenal Center for Creative Leadership. When I was a young major in GOMO, I had responsibility for training, the training desk, as it was referred to, and became familiar with CCL in that capacity. And I remember that Steve Smith said, if you're going to take this role, Mike, I want you to go out to CCL and experience it and get a taste of what it's all about. And I went out there having no idea what to expect, because I'd just begun to take on that training role in GOMO, and I was blown away, completely blown away. And I'd like to share something with you that the Center for Creative Leadership recently published on the subject of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then I'm going to circle back to questions, because that's what I'd like to have us sit with for a little bit and talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. within the context of our beloved Army. CCL published a statement that says, to make progress on DEI, senior leaders must first acknowledge the societal inequities and recognize that unintentionally, their organization isn't a level playing field. And the reason it isn't, just to extend that analogy is just a bit more, is that our society isn't a level playing field. And therefore, without some recognition of the reality of our societal reality, that is, and then making conscious and deliberate adjustments to or any organization, and we all know what a magnificent and huge organization our great Army is. It can't be a level playing field in any organization either. I'm going to share my screen for just a moment because I want to share a quote with everyone. Oh, you're going to have to make me a co-host. Thank you. Got it. Can you see that full screen yet? Hold on a second. Here we go. There we go. This is a quote by Sam Kean, and it's particularly one that I particularly like. There are two quotes I will show you. What shapes our lives, according to Sam Kean, are the questions we ask, refuse to ask, or never think to ask. I can't imagine that a quote like that could be more meaningful for leaders, especially leaders of organizations who are dealing with difficult, challenging issues like those that General Shinseki and some others on this bell and others on this call have dealt with over their professional lives and their personal lives as well. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second because I want to develop this just a bit more. Here we go. The Army's people strategy, diversity, equity, and its diversity, equity, and inclusion annex is aspirational, as it should be. As it should be. It's very, very aspirational. And it asks certain questions. It asks certain questions of its leaders, of its potential members, and challenges them. By potential members, I mean the young men and women who are raising their right hand every day to join our great institution. And its civilian leadership as well. But what is the principal question that it's asking, that the Army's diversity strategy? And I reread it again this morning after spending 3 days in front of this screen with those magnificent coaches. And I want to show you something that I shared with them. In fact, you'll still see the markings from George Mason University on these next two slides. What is it really asking them? And this is what it is asking of them. It's asking them to recognize that we are all, where's that's not the one I want yet. There we go. Can you see that in full screen, Tony? No? Okay. Bear with me 1 second. Should be able to see it in, but can you see the slide at all? The Bronfenbrenner slide? Okay, perfect. I don't want you to, this is not an eye test, so I don't want you to strain to read it. I'll explain generally what this is. And I shared this with the 25 folks becoming coaches probably sometime in July or August. from Urie Bronfenbrenner, 1979 Theory of Ecological Systems. Bronfenbrenner was a Russian naturalized US American citizen, and his theory still holds true today. And that theory is simply this, and this gets to the question I posed. What is the question that the Army in its aspirational diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy is asking of its leaders, especially its leaders, uniformed and civilian, and also asking of its members who are joining our ranks, or the Army's ranks, from our civilian world, where earlier I pointed out the fact from the Center for Creative Leadership highlights and CCL's highlighting of the fact that our society has some issues that it must address. It's asking all of us to recognize that when we are children, we come into the world with certain attributes and states of mind, quite frankly. Attributes, states of mind. Some of us are naturally, and this is the context within which I was presenting this, some of us are naturally a little more resilient than others. Some of us are naturally a little more forgiving than others. Some of us are naturally a little more loving than others. And some of us, simply by virtue of our inherited traits, are, and I can do this with Tony, some of us are taller than others. And those are hardwired in us. What his ever increasing circles depict are the microsystems that then begin to shape us in very unique ways, shape our mindsets, shape our thinking about ourselves, our family members, our loved ones, our extended family, and what he refers to as the microsystem. Then there's the macro system. We go off into our schools, our clubs, boys and girls clubs, and we are shaped in other ways. Beyond that, we now have to look at, well, what part of the world are we from? What part of the United States are we from? And culturally, those things have impacts on shaping what we are and how we view both ourselves as well as our world. And then eventually it works its way out into the institutional world, where our religious beliefs and religious institutions shape us as well. What coaching has done, I really wish I could show this thing in the, but my control panel is down here. Let me try this. I want to show it full screen, and it's going to be important for the follow-on too. Bear with me, please. There we go. There we go. Now, let me get this out of the way. Okay. What the coaching world has done, and this comes from an organization called the Strozzi Institute, where I've done some training in somatics in coaching. It's adapted Bronfenbrenner's model for how coaches think about and listen to clients, especially executive leadership clients, and hear what they are conveying through the lens of Bronfenbrenner's model, the individual beliefs and attitudes, the family and how the shaping of the family has shaped those beliefs and attitudes, the community, how it has shaped those attitudes. I'll never forget when I was commanding Army recruiting, being in Cabrini Green in Chicago, one of the biggest slums in the city of Chicago. High-rise buildings, it's no longer there. High-rise buildings, projects, if you will. And the recruiter in that station in Cabrini Green was one of the most remarkable people I have ever met. He was a gang member from Cabrini Green in his previous life. And he was fearless. And I remember he was fearless, but he was fearless because he had turned his life around, and he saw the community and the people in that community through a different lens than the one he saw it through when he was gangbanging, if you will. And from time to time, when I look at this model from the Strozzi Institute, this is what I see. And sometimes when I'm sitting and listening to senior executives, I can recall last week coaching an executive, a very senior executive from Walmart Corporation, corporate headquarters. And this is what I was hearing at processing. So again, back to what is it that the Army is asking of its leaders? It's frankly asking them to recognize that we all come into this world and evolve through these models, first initiated by Bronfenbrenner and adapted, if you will, by the Strozzi Institute and adopted by the coaching world. But what's the relevance of that? The relevance of that is this. Back to sharing my screen one more time. And General Shinseki will recognize this because he introduced me to this concept, to this author. This is what the Army is struggling with. This is what, in my opinion, every organization is struggling with. And simply the fact that culture will absolutely dominate and eat strategy. And I'm not talking exclusively about the Army culture now. I'm talking about the culture of our nation. I'm talking about the culture of, and the shaping of the culture of our recruits who are entering our force. And this is why I used the term earlier. The Army's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy is aspirational. It has to be. It has to be. Otherwise, nothing will change. And because of Drucker's wisdom and what we have learned, leaders around the globe have learned from him, it must be aspirational, or like, again, nothing will change. I'd like to pause for a second because there are a couple more points I want to make, but I really would like to have some questions at this point, and then we'll do questions again. Is that okay, Tony?
Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question.
Yes, I have a question. This is Christine Enriquez.
Hi, Christine.
Hello there, General. General, you look just the same, sir. You haven't aged at all.
You're flattering me, and I'm sure that's not true, but thank you so much.
Great, sir. And I told General Taguba that it was such an honor to work for you, sir, in the G1, and also to know your brilliant daughter, Shawnette. And I also shared with him that me and Shawnette and Khan were really good buddies back at
Yes, I know.
And I really miss her, and I know she's doing well, sir.
I'd love to see you again, Christine. It's great to hear your voice. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you so much for speaking with us today. And sir, my current assignment is the Director of Human Resources at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency here at beautiful Fort Belvoir, sir.
Nice.
Yes, sir.
DTRA, old DTRA.
Yeah, DTRA, sir, and I'm really happy to be there. Sir, one of the things that we have in our DTRA HR is a mentoring program, a recruitment and outreach program, and I'm the Asian American Pacific Islander Employee Resource Group leader, sir. And I'm just so pleased that they have entrusted me with those duties. Sir, but at DITRA, we have a very senior population, a lot of SES GOFOs, sir. Our director is a presidential appointee, SES 3. Our deputy director is a 2-star Army. And then we have a full complement of Air Force generals there and our Navy GOFO counterpart. Top heavy on the GS 14 and 15 level, sir, as well, and with scientists and such. So, sir, I would like to get your thoughts on, I know we are trying to change a culture, but I would like to get your thoughts on, especially when we are trying to change a culture in a very senior organization. We have AAPI month this month, and we're doing a lot of senior leader roundtables, sir. We're doing a cultural and ethnic display. We also have Miss Dottie Lee speaking on anti-Asian violence next week. And then we're going to do a salute to our AAPI heroes, sir, with the first ever DITRA AAPI awards for Senator Inouye civilians and the Spirit of the 442nd for military awardees, sir. But I feel like the culture there, we are trying, but they're very senior, sir. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are to try to change a culture when many of them are at the very senior level and kind of have already have their thought processes in place, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christine. And it's really, again, a delight to be able to speak with you. And DITRA is very lucky to have you there. Very, very lucky to have you. You know, I feel completely inadequate to answer your question, especially with General Shinseki on this Zoom call, because this is something that I watched him do in the Army masterfully in the Army. And so did Tony and Eldon, as well as perhaps Bell. I think Bell was at OSD during that time frame. Just masterful. First of all, it takes time. And that's one of the main points. That's one of the main points that I want to communicate. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of energy. But the other thing I would offer, Christine, is this, and this is why I go back to that question, that quote from Sam Kean. The questions we ask, the questions we don't ask. One of the things I've learned in my coaching career, almost 9 years now, is that a lot of leadership is being unafraid to ask the tough questions. To being unafraid to ask the tough questions. And you may not always like the response you get, nor may you always receive a timely response, your estimation of what timeliness means. But questions like truth don't go away. Tough, real, hard questions that are based on solid ethical grounds like truth do not go away. And in fact, they germinate. They like truth. They will be addressed. The thing that I observed and sir, please forgive me if I misstate anything. And credit it to my declining head and not my heart. But the thing that I saw General Shinseki do so masterfully when Tony and I were 1-stars around what, 2000? Around 1999, 2000. And his transformation strategy was begin to shape the future of the Army from the bottom up. And I was at the bottom of where that shaping was occurring as a 1-star, and so was Tony. And Eldon too, I assume. I don't know enough about Eldon's timing to be able to comment on that deliberately. But what I mean by that is that I watched the chief gather young, aspiring 1-stars like myself and convince us, and it wasn't difficult to do, that the Army needed to change in order to remain relevant to the future of our nation. And by the way, that aspect, we won't have time to talk about that today. But the Army's traditional way of viewing itself is one of the reasons why this people strategy and the diversity, equity, and inclusion challenge will be a challenge because of the closeness with which the Army historically and culturally views itself relative to the nation itself. That's not shared by any other service, by the way. Mike Rochelle's opinion, you can attribute it exclusively to me. We see ourselves, the Army, see ourselves as indelibly tied to the nation's history from 1775 on. That's not shared by any other service. And it impacts our culture, and it impacts the way in which we see ourselves. But back to the point. It's in terms of being able to make the strategy, the transformation strategy work. What I saw the chief do, my interpretation, was get those 1 stars who were 5 years, 6 years, 10 years later going to be 2 stars and 3 stars. And that's how you make the change. It was masterfully done, masterfully done. But Christine, it takes time. It takes time. The other thing I would offer is this, as a former Army G1 and a fairly decent student of organizational theory. As a matter of fact, I was making reference to this book yesterday, and with my Mason folks, Edgar Schein from MIT. Be careful, and this is where you can have a huge impact in your organization, regardless of your grade, if you ask the right questions. Be careful what you reward. Be careful what you reward, because you will send signals across your organization, and those signals that you send across your organization with what you reward in terms of performance, in terms of behavior, in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's just put it out there, those will grow like roots in the organization, and people will see it. And those rewards will then generate and cultivate behaviors that align to what it is you reward. That's as much of an answer. And I feel completely inadequate to answer your question, Christine, but I'm delighted you asked it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I really feel like that's very helpful. I know it will take time. Also, General Taguba has also helped me with that. And I know he's in contact with Brigadier General Conless, our Filipino-American Air Force General that's right at DLA, the same complex, sir, and Brigadier General Edwards, our Air Force 1-star Vietnamese descent right in Ditra. So, sir, I think that's a lot of gains right there, right with the AAPI community, with those 1 stars that should come together and help. And you're absolutely right, sir. How are we awarding these people? And I think that was a huge step where we're having our first ever DITRA AAPI awards with that type of,
Marvelous.
through. Yes, sir. So I think we're making some gains there, sir. And with the SecDef messaging, a lot of senior leaders messaging that this is important. I agree with you, sir. It's going to take time, but at least we're making strides and trying, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Christine. It's a delight to hear your voice.
It's wonderful to see you, sir. Blessings to you and your family, and continued success to you and Shawnette, sir.
Thanks so much. Other questions, Tony? If not,
I'm sorry. So do you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
I can.
go ahead and ask a question.
I'm sorry to step on that. I'm sorry to step on you, gentlemen.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, sir. So I'm Eugene Miranda. I am a major. I just recently transitioned to be an executive officer here at 2nd Squadron, 3rd Cavalry Regiment in Fort Hood, Texas. And of course, navigating the information environment challenges as you guys and you ladies and gentlemen clearly see out there in the news. Contrary to that, there's a lot of good things going on here. But sir, to your point, I really appreciate the initiatives that you're and the discussion and dialogue that you are leading here. Because for me, coming up in the Army, is seeing all the advancements in the Army keeping pace with societal change with this very encouraging and empowering to me. And for me, to take your words and turn those into words myself, definitely striving to teach and embody diversity, equity, and inclusion among the much younger officers, just given my charge as an appropriate officer. But I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and how you put up that posture in that culture strategy for breakfast, and I'm interested in the trust and how your thoughts and feedback and how the Army is trending by way of talent management. Excluding social records.
I was only able to get maybe every third word, if that much. Was someone else hearing him better than I? And can translate that? It sounded like a fantastic question, and I'd love to be able to have heard it.
Yeah, you were coming in somewhat intermittent. So please ask the question again.
Send it on the chat, please.
That's a wonderful suggestion. Yeah, the chat could work. And if there's another question while he's putting that into the chat, I'll be happy to take that. Or I can continue with what little bit more of a presentation I have, because I want to get into a little bit of another report, a RAND report that I also revisited from 2020 and for preparation for this talk. Thank you for sending me that RAND report, Tony.
Well, go ahead and continue, Mike.
Okay, all right, good. Let me say this: in 2020, the RAND Corporation did a study on promotion to flag officer and across all the services, and did a wonderful comparison of the services in terms of how they looked at that. And this is only the objective should never be promotion to flag officer. The objective should always be, in my humble estimation, and the way I always looked at it, and I know this is the way the chief looked at it also, is are you promoting the right people through the various levels, 03, 04, 05, 06, so that you have the requisite talent and the requisite diversity from which to select your flag officers. And we're challenged by that. The Army is challenged by that. And there are a couple of reasons pointed out in the RAND study why the Army is challenged by that. I didn't look at the other services. I really I'm not interested in knowing what their issues are, to be candid with you. And among those one of those is the point that I made about how the Army historically has viewed itself as the absolutely indelibly linked service to the nation and the ultimate servant of the nation in that capacity. And I was immensely proud of that when I was serving. I'm still immensely proud of it, and I'm sure everyone on this call is proud as well. But think about what the challenges are with that. The largest service, we still, even with the improvements and enhancements that have been made with the talent management systems in the Army, and General McConville has done a magnificent job with that. He was on the ground floor of that. Even at that, we still have very much an industrial-based talent management process. the size and the scale of the Army almost necessitate that. I would, and I'm not signing up for that, because frankly, if I were able to change any one thing, it would be that, to make it less industrial based. But here's the challenge. Because the Army sees itself as the ultimate servant of the nation, because the Army has a scale as large as it does, and readiness to defend the nation's interest anywhere in the world at any time, the readiness piece must be balanced perfectly all the time with the talent management strategy and the talent management processes, whatever those may evolve to be. In other words, you can only have so much choice in an organization the size of the Army and with the readiness demands of the Army. Now, if you're the Air Force, and I shouldn't point out any particular service, but if you're the Air Force, and essentially your platforms and the operators of those platforms are your primary pointy end of the spear, and everything else supports that platform, you can have enormous choice in how you manage your talent, assess your talent, train your talent, and still maintain readiness. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. In the Army, since we don't man platforms, we equip the man and woman and prepare them to defend the nation. Readiness is an individualized, not to say that equipment readiness isn't important. Of course it is, but you can't function without the human capital, the human resources that are necessary to execute whatever the mission might be. The Army is a land component force. So, nonetheless, and I'm gonna stop now. There maybe one other slide I'd like to show, and I'll check the chat to see if I can get that gentleman's what sounded like a really excellent question. I want to come back to this. This is where I'd like to end in terms of my actual presentation. Aspirational. I commend the people and the leaders who approved and reviewed and approved this strategy, the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. It's aspirational, and it must be. It's comprehensive, but if I were going to sit with leaders who have the responsibility for executing this, and I won't, but if I were going to sit with them, I would say, let's put this strategy side by side with the RAND study and ask ourselves a few questions. Questions about culture, questions about how we can shape that culture in much the same way that General Shinseki shaped the Army's culture in the present day and into the future by decades when he was the Chief of Staff of the Army. And then always ask ourselves what shapes our lives, or tell ourselves, I should say, what shapes our lives are the questions we ask, refuse to ask, or never think to ask about our society from which we draw our young men and women who are willing to sacrifice for the nation, about our institutions, about our training, about what we reward, to Christine's question and my response to her question, to what we reward, and how does it align, how does what we reward, acknowledge and reward, align with our aspirational strategy in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Tony, let me stop sharing here. I hope that's what you were looking for. I hope it's helpful. Let me again thank you for inviting me. It's great to see General Shinseki again, Eldon, of course, and always you, Tony. We need to go back out for another bento box meal. It's been a while.
Yeah, Asia Bistro.
Yeah.
The question from Eugene was the organizational part, the organizational culture that we're talking about, and you mentioned readiness in people. But his question is your thoughts, and I know you're probably not like me, have not read too deeply on the Army Talent Management Program. That's
No, I have not.
all part of the people process, where now that they're getting a process and on the call that there are guys being selected for promotion after you've done everything, selected for lieutenant colonel, and then several selected for battalion command. Before the slate is that they go through
Right. Right.
I forget the general officer, Major General, who said that when he was being interviewed on AUSA, that does that program actually promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion? And he says yes. Well, again, it's a new program, it's aspirational, and it kind of strayed away from the typical personal management process that we had for years. But any perspective that you could provide for our questionnaire.
Well, I know enough about it, I think, to respond to the question in a very generalized fashion. And the answer may not be, my answer may not be very satisfying, because frankly, I think it's too early to tell. That's my answer. It's too early to tell. Often, plans and challenges, plans and adaptations like that to very, very complex systems don't necessarily reveal often some of the unintended consequences of those shifts until further down the road. Likewise, you may not even realize all of the benefits of such an adaptation until a little further down. It's interesting, but for me, the jury is still out. I think it's too early to tell, honestly.
It's been, I think it took a while. Your predecessor, now the Chief of Staff of the Army, created that program for a reason, of course.
Yeah.
Not criticizing, but it's still new. People are majors, of course, right now, who are graduating from CGSC or other college and staff, command and staff colleges, are also eager on checking off the block that says, I want to be promoted. I want to get all these assignments. I want to be a battalion commander, later as a brigade commander, but there's another additional step that's required of them. But again, it's new. I think whatever the process might be.
Yeah, in some respects, Tony, if I may, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but in some respects, the policy begs a question for me. The shift in the policy begs a slight question. And the slight question is, what is it we're trying to fix? Are we trying to fix gaps in the professional development, professional military education? Are we trying to fix gaps in, we're obviously addressing something.
Yeah.
Or we wouldn't be doing it.
Right.
But are we addressing it at the right point? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I think the jury is still out. in terms of potential unintended consequences.
Well, there's a question that's being refused to ask, you might say. No. Given that, what are we asking to do? I want to, you talked about, you mentioned about organizational culture. It goes to what Peter Drucker was saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
That's right. That's right.
And we have our organizational culture in the Army, proud tradition, heritage, blah, blah, blah. But we also have cultural people in the Army that may or may not subscribe to that organizational structure, culture that's been in place in 1775.
Yeah.
And we can only say that, but we deal with people in the Army. And there's multi-generational people in the Army today.
Correct.
Generation from baby boomers to Generation Z, and they all think differently.
That's for
And
sure.
go with Blunt Brenner's theory is that how do we try to address DEI in there, right? With our aspirational process of saying we need to have a board, we need to have new sets of policies, but it's only as good as when it's actually applied.
That's so
People
true.
are actually understanding that this particular policy, that a program like the People's Strategy will subscribe to the people's thinking, like the Generation Z, other than the fact that they want to serve our country. That's the aspirational part. But your thoughts on that, whether it's difficult or easy or.
Well, first of all, it goes back to how I began this talk, meaning using the CCL quote, to make progress in diversity, equity, and inclusion, senior leaders first need to acknowledge the societal inequities and recognize that that unintentionally their organizations aren't a level playing field because our society isn't a level playing field. And so, my 4 years, I hold the record after Major General Jack Wheeler of being the longest serving and surviving commanding general of Army recruiting, right at 4 years. Tough 4 years. And I got an opportunity to see our society through a lens that many people don't have the opportunity to see it. In some respects, it was very, that perspective was very reassuring. In other respects, it was not so reassuring. But it's what we have. It's who we are. It's America, in every sense of the word. As you mentioned, multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, and with an all-volunteer force, which I pray that we will always have. You have what you have. And I think it takes programs, it takes fearless leaders like General McConville, and others who are serving at that level. I don't know many of them personally. I know McConville personally, Lloyd Austin. It takes leaders, fearless leaders like that, to ask those tough questions. There's a wonderful book, another wonderful book. I won't get it now, but I had the privilege of reading it 5 years ago. The title is A More Beautiful Question. Written by if you'll bear with me, maybe I better get it because I'm not going to remember the name of the author. Just take me 1 second. Yeah, I knew his name was the same as a Chief Supreme Court Justice, Warren Burger. A More Beautiful Question. And I had the privilege not only of reading the book 4 or 5 years ago, but hearing Warren Burger speak at a coaches convention, executive and leadership coaches convention here in Washington, D.C., shortly after he published the book, shortly after the book was released. And this goes to my remarks or my response to Christine. You know, answers sometimes are far less valuable than the questions that we ask, because we can very easily answer the wrong question. To your point about the talent management and all of that, what's the question that we're trying to address here? I'm not sure I understand. And back again, in response to your question, Tony, I'm comforted by the fact that we have leaders who are solidly ethical, that the Army has leaders who are solidly ethical and are trying to ask the right questions. But it's not always easy. And so back to the Sam Kean quote.
Hey, Mike, Rick Shinseki, may I?
Yes, sir.
May I introduce a comment, since you've been so overly generous and kind? I think in overstating a lot of what you remember.
No, sir, I'm not.
I love the Sam Kean quotation because of the three options. You know, the questions you choose to ask or choose not to ask sort
Yes,
of
sir.
in your province. The questions that you don't know enough to ask
Yes, sir.
are sort of outside that province, and now you are relying on others to help you. And in the meetings, you and I and Tony and others in the military, whether you're in uniform or civilian, the meetings we're used to, or at least recall attending, are pretty homogeneous. They're pretty senior people, have gone up to the ranks, shared experiences. So when you sit at the table, there is this comfort level that everyone else there has a shared perspective. May not be identical, but shared experience. And so the questions are usually get out on the table, especially if the senior leader has the time and is willing to go around the room and make sure, you know, check every position in the backbench to make sure that you haven't missed someone with something to say. That's technique, you know, and making sure that everyone feels responsible to ask those questions about that third issue that you're not smart enough to ask yourself. Where I found myself challenged is where you're in a mixed meeting where there is no shared perspective. And if you're not careful about setting the conditions for people feeling like they're a part of the meeting, you won't get the same response. And there are times, and this is not in the Army, but you know, afterwards in government over at VA, where a multiplicity of viewpoints and experiences, and not all of it shared. I found myself going around the room before the meeting, shaking hands with everybody there, because the faces change, you know, week to week. Shaking hands with everyone who's in the meeting, and just saying hello, you know, very quickly, maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer. Some meetings had 40 people in it. But once you do that, and at the end, when you say, what are your questions? And for those of you who may hesitate about asking a question because you think it may be a dumb question, let me assure you, the only dumb questions in the room are the ones that don't get asked. And then I began to see a little more response from folks getting at that third issue, because I think Kean is absolutely right. And you're brilliant in focusing on this, because that's a challenge for every leader, is how to get the best out of the organization.
Exactly.
And the best of in the organization sometimes resides in the lonely scout on the extreme right flank of the unit that never gets to talk to anybody, and all he has is to listen to everybody else talk on the radio. How do you get that person engaged? And so I've struggled with Keene's quotation. It's great policy, but it takes attention and technique to get to the issue, which is, show me where the risk is here. Are
Right.
we doing things right, or do we have to change course? And, what do we think? Because ultimately, risk is inescapable. It must be addressed, it must be mitigated, and that's the responsibility of leadership. And leadership's sole responsibility is success of the organization, to include everyone in it.
Yes, sir.
No matter what they look like, no matter gender, and no matter rank. And the ones I say most challenged on is where there are generals in the room, and then we have an array of ranks that go to much more junior folks who don't believe they have a role in a meeting. And obviously that's what, Keene is all about. It's making sure
Precisely.
that everybody there has a say. I'll give you one other anecdote real quickly and not tie up this session any longer. I was a young second lieutenant commissioned in June of '65 and in combat in Vietnam by January. And, about 7 months after commissioning, no basic officer course because the Army didn't think I needed it, and I couldn't afford the seats. So here we were, and it was not just me, but a whole group of us that went to Vietnam into combat in a way that Army never intended, and that is without the officer basic course being put in that leadership role. Just to set the time, January of '65, there were less than 20,000 Americans in Vietnam.
Mhm.
By December of '65, there were over 200,000, a tenfold increase. So you can see what happened to the Army. It just expanded the requirement to march, and we outgrew our assets. A lot of World War II Korea veterans were retiring because it was time, and there were a lot of vacancies. So young lieutenants like me didn't get to go to the basic course. We had to learn the hard way. And thank goodness, our instructors were seasoned non-commissioned officers, E5, E6, E7. Except for guys like Ernie Kincaid and Les Cotton, my two NCOs, you'd have somebody else sitting in on this talk today. But they were marvelous. By the next time I went to Vietnam, which is only a couple of years later for a second tour, all of that had changed. We had young non-commissioned officers coming out of the shake and bake process. 90 days basic training. If you're the top graduate, you were promoted to E6, and you wore the rank of E6, drew the pay of E6, and then we weren't smart enough to keep control of who these folks were, and they ended up in Vietnam-based units like I had, rank-wearing staff sergeant, squad leader, who was the risk in the organization, as much as I was the risk a few years earlier.
Understand.
And here I sat trying to figure out how does this happen in this great organization of ours? I never got to answer that question until 30 years later when I'm serving as the chief. And I'm reminded that we all have a role to play. We make the best decisions we can. And I'm sure the shortage of E6s, there were folks in the business that said, well, we just promote faster and we'll create more E6s. So we checked that block, but they were not squad leaders. And there's where the disconnect occurred. And so to your point, asking the right question, sometime when that policy was being established, what would have been important. And the answer in response to that question would have been, okay, so what do we do to keep, the risk under control? And that is, we manage each of these fellows and gals individually, and we never put them in a situation above, their learned experience. I just share that with you as, policy is one thing, technique is another, and you got to sort of make both of that work to be a success at the business. One of the days that I worked for you, Mike, in recruiting, I was giving a troop talk, short notice. Staff aide said, "Hey, we got this unit, I think, out of the 82nd that was in Kosovo province, I think, on a high ground someplace. They were there on operation. We'd like you to give them a, troop talk." So you always say yes, and you don't know the audience. They never tell you that AFN with its cameras are going to be there. Once you wander in and you start, delivering your remarks, and there is risk even in that situation, Mike.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Staff sergeant in the back row stands up after I'm done speaking. He says, "Sir, I could take a job in industry right now. They'll pay me 3 times more than what you're paying me." And I'm stumped. I didn't, that's not a question you usually get. And the cameras are rolling, and so finally I say, "So I guess that means you're not going to re-up with us." And there's this pause. And the cameras are rolling. And this young man says, "No, sir, I am going to re-enlist." And I said, "No, wait a minute. You just told me you could go out there and get a job in industry 3 times what I'm paying you. And here you are, in muddy BDUs on a piece of ground in a place called Kosovo. So what are you telling me?" And he said, "The people I serve with are the best I've ever met. And I don't think I'll meet any better out there, and I'm going to re-enlist for this outfit." I felt like $1 million at that point.
I know you did.
He had made the case for me, and I didn't have to wrestle. But those youngsters in the back row, in a troop talk, where all the commanders are down front, are very much a part of the meeting, and we need to be attentive to them and make sure that their views are heard and respected. And ultimately, that's what leadership is about. And if we can do that, we'll get by the current hurdles we're dealing with socially. So anyway, sorry to intrude, Mike. Thank you for the
Not at all, sir.
presentation today.
Not at all, sir. Thank
Great
you.
hearing you.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, General. Yeah, Shinzeki. Mike, we have one question, and I think you'll be surprised that this is one where our junior leaders are asking. And the
Okay.
question from Sergeant Julie Tam. As a junior level personnel, how would you recommend we participate in the DEI initiatives, especially when leadership is skeptical of the DEI mission?
Beautiful question. Beautiful question. And it's very closely related to the response. My response is very closely related to the response that I gave Christine. Two answers. I'll add one more piece to that. One of the things that I've learned since I've become a coach is that one of the sources of frustration, and one of the greatest sources of frustration and anxiety, is trying to change something that's completely outside your scope to change. And I'm not discouraging you with this, but I'm asking you to frame it in a certain way that you think about it. And it goes like this. In terms of influencing DEI in your organization, what can you influence by pure fiat? What do you have the ability to say, this will stop or this will change right now? And those things that you have the ability to do that with, then by all means, take those, Julie. Then secondly, know the things and the policies and the situations and circumstances that you can influence. And then be satisfied with influencing those, because you don't have the authority or the wherewithal to change them by fiat. And then ask yourself the question, so what can I live with? What can I live with? What can I accept? And know the difference. And where's all that going? Where that is going is that I have no doubt that as an NCO, you can influence by both fiat and influence and your personal influence a lot. But recognize where that boundary with those things that you simply cannot influence, where they lay. But here's how you can even begin to influence those. When I responded to Christine, I talked about the fact that questions that are based around solid ethical foundations, like truth, do not go away. They hang in the air, actually. They honestly hang in the air like clouds. And eventually, your wonderful questions, why are we doing this way? Why are there no women in positions like this? Why are there so few Asian Americans in leadership in this organization contrasted with this organization? Those are ethical questions, and questions are infinitely, as you just heard General Shinseki say, questions are infinitely more important than the answers, because you can have an answer to the wrong question. Does that help? Great. Thank you.
Julie?
Where are you?
Hi, sir. I'm actually at my monthly battle assembly at this moment, and it's lunchtime. So I am taking my lunch to come and listen.
Geographically, where are you?
Fort Carson, Colorado.
Oh, got it. Wonderful. Thank you for your question. And
Great.
thank you for being here.
No, thank you, sir, for taking the time. I actually just came out of a town hall that was being hosted at the brigade level. And
Nice.
I did ask a question to the brigade commander about his recruitment and retention plans of AAPIs with critical language skills, especially given the movement into the Pacific. I asked that same question of my commanding general last month, neither of whom were able to really give a solid answer. So I don't think that, I think now they're going to be thinking about it, but I don't think before that question was asked that it was actually thought about. So,
Well,
so I appreciate you saying just asking those questions when you're giving an opportunity and not being afraid as someone who's very junior to do so, because sounds like you guys appreciate that level of feedback.
Absolutely. Well, good for you. Good for you for asking that question. And rest assured that, like I said, like truth, it will not go away. It'll hang out there in the air. You may have to ask it again at some point, but good for you. Fantastic. Proud.
I'm continue asking. I also, just one more thing that I also
Please,
ask
please.
is because they're always saying, they're always telling us, the junior folks, like, help us find a solution, right? And so today I was like, I know you're going to ask me to find a solution to this issue, right? I'm like, the issue is not that Asian Americans don't want to serve, because we do want to serve. Okay. The issue is that there's systemic issues right now preventing us from serving. For instance, we have to get the security clearance, right? And that is one of the biggest hurdles. And I'm like, so what is the command? What is the army? What is the military? What is the nation doing to assist a known roadblock to service for Asian Americans, especially when the military, I don't know if you've heard, but come September, every single army position is going to require secret clearance.
No, oh my gosh, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. And that's going to cause some problems, right? And it's going to even prevent us, obviously, a majority of us having, maybe family overseas. That's one of the adjudicative, guidelines. That's like an automatic, oh, nope, too much of a risk. Can't, can't serve. Sorry.
Wow.
So I asked that question to both the brigade commander and the commanding general. And I was actually, to be honest, quite disappointed at the answer, because this was the answer I got. It's above my pay grade.
Yeah. Well, being disappointed is one thing, but being dissuaded is another. And I can see you're not going to be dissuaded.
No.
Mike, I want to
Good
add
for you.
that Sergeant Julie Tam took almost 4 years to get recruited in the Army, and I've been associated as her mentor until she did get. When I signed, she had me recite the oath of enlistment at the MEP station at Fort Meade. But she also completed OCS, one of the top 20.
Wow.
And the issue of security clearance has been bearing on her because of previous service. But that's true. There's been
Wow.
some difficulty of getting them security clearances, not just Asians, but other folks that naturalize, for that matter. And we're trying to deal with that, of course. And suffice to say, she's well educated, master's from Johns Hopkins, has talent, a linguist, and work on DNI and the intelligence side. And we want her to be in the United States Army because we need her talent.
Wow.
But she's also, I would say, she's well extroverted. I know her very well. And I'm proud of her asking the right questions, because that's what we want our leaders to do, is ask the
Absolutely.
question.
Absolutely.
And not refuse not to ask the question. But and this is where DNI comes in, right? So
It certainly does. Well, I certainly am delighted that I had an opportunity to interact with you. I
That's
really
good.
am. Thank you.
well,
you so much.
we want to end. I think we've had a successful seminar, but
Can't hear you, Tony. You're on mute now. You're still on mute.
okay.
There you
Our
go.
time is up. I owe you a bento box next time I see you.
I'll collect.
You get
too.
a couple of them if you want. But thank you for your illuminating insights on how and what challenges do we face with DNI today. But those challenges are that's not impossible
No.
to overcome, provided that we have champions, leaders and champions at DNI that we do have. We want to, as General Shinzeki used to say, tell us that we should represent the color of America in our armed forces, not just the color, but the talent, the skills, the grit, the courage, because, we want to serve our country, and that's, we ought to be doing that. But thank you. And again, before we end, I want to thank the people on board of directors for organizing the seminar. Our next two seminars are coming up. but the standards of conduct for military and civilian professionals, which is in July of this year, and owning your transition by one of our own, Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Nunn. That's in September. But so log in and come and join us. It's free. You won't get a bento box from me unless I owe you something. Thanks to General Shinzeki. And maybe we ought to invite him and talk to us about that more. It's when it's, I guess when it's necessary, but we don't have to wear a mask. We don't have to wear a mask now, but we'll do that soon. But thanks everybody for joining in on our seminar, and please stay safe and stay healthy. And thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. Thanks, Mike. We'll talk to you.
Thank you for inviting me, Tony. Thank you.